combat veteran finds peace with his therapy chickens, but a vindictive HOA member is bent on destroying it all. Can justice prevail when one man stands against the system? You won't believe the lengths they'll go to silence him. Don't miss what happens next in this unbelievable true story. This is your final warning, Mr. Jackson. That eyesore you call a chicken coop is a blight on our community, a health hazard, and a clear violation of Berkeley Heights Homeowners Association bylaws. Section 4, subsection C, paragraph 2. The voice on the other end of the phone was as sharp and unpleasant as the screech of tires on asphalt. Karen Blackwell, newly elected to the HOA board and armed with a zealousness that bordered on fanatical, had made Noah Jackson, a black man whose quiet dignity she seemed determined to chip away at, and his small flock of therapeutic hens her personal crusade. Noah, 47, a man whose broad shoulders still bore the invisible weight of 3 tours in Fallujah, gripped the phone tighter, the familiar tremor in his hands. A phantom echo of explosions and gunfire intensified. He'd seen men like Blackwell before, in different uniforms, wielding different kinds of arbitrary power. "Mrs. Blackwell," he began, his voice a low, steady rumble that he consciously kept even. "We've been over this. These aren't just chickens. They're emotional support animals. Dr. Ramirez provided the HOA with all the necessary documentation. They're clean, they're quiet, and they're contained on my property." He glanced out the kitchen window at the small, meticulously kept coop in his backyard. Henrietta, his calmest hen, was currently dust bathing in a patch of sunlight, a picture of feathered serenity. That serenity was what kept the wolf of his PTSD from the door most days, a fragile peace in a world that often felt unwelcoming. Emotional support animals for chickens. That's the most preposterous thing I've ever heard. Mr. Jackson, next, you'll be telling me your garden needs therapy. Her laugh was a brittle, condescending thing. The bylaws are clear. No livestock. And those things are livestock. They smell, they attract rodents, and frankly, they lower property values. There have been no official complaints about smell or rodents. Karen, Noah countered, the use of her first name a deliberate reclamation of his own space in the conversation. He knew it irked her. "And my property is immaculate. You've seen it yourself on your inspections." He used the word inspections loosely. Snooping felt more accurate for her frequent, unannounced walks along his property line, her gaze lingering a little too long, a little too critically, as if searching for any pretext. He was used to that kind of scrutiny, had felt it his whole life, but it didn't make it any less infuriating. The threats had started subtly a few months ago, shortly after Noah had moved to this quiet tree-lined street in Richmond, Virginia, in the spring of 2016. He'd hoped for a fresh start, a place where the ghosts of his past might finally recede, a place where he could simply be. The chickens, Agatha, Mildred, Beatrice, and Henrietta were Dr. Ramirez's idea. "Something to ground you, Noah," she'd said. "Something to care for that cares for you back, in its own simple way." And she was right. The gentle clucking, the warmth of a freshly laid egg, the routine of their care, it had become an anchor in the turbulent sea of his mind. But Karen Blackwell, with her perfectly coiffed silver hair and eyes that seemed to miss nothing and approve of even less, had quickly identified the chickens, and perhaps their owner, as an unacceptable deviation from her vision of Berkeley Heights perfection. First came the polite, then less polite. Notices slipped into his mailbox. Then the certified letters, citing obscure HOA rules that Noah was certain were being creatively interpreted, or perhaps selectively enforced. He'd responded calmly, professionally, providing his therapist's letter, and even offering to build a higher fence or plant more shrubbery to obscure the coop. All offers were rebuffed with a curtness that felt personal. "The letters you've received are not suggestions, Mr. Jackson. They are official notifications of violations, Failure to comply will result in further action. Karen Blackwell said, her voice dropping to a menacing purr. The HOA has a responsibility to maintain the aesthetic and financial integrity of this neighborhood. Your therapy chickens are a direct threat to that, and you're a direct threat to my well-being, Miss Blackwell, Noah shot back, his own anger finally flaring, the careful control slipping. He knew, even as he said it, that his anger might be twisted, used against him, as it had been before. These birds are more therapeutic than any pill they've ever prescribed me. They're doing no harm to anyone. That's a matter of opinion, Mr. Jackson, and the HOA's opinion is the one that matters within Barclay Heights. You have 48 hours to remove the chickens and the illegal structure. After that, the HOA will take steps to remedy the situation itself, and you will be billed for all associated costs. The line went dead, leaving Noah with the dial tone buzzing in his ear like a disturbed hornet. 48 hours. He looked out at his girls. Henrietta had been joined by Agatha, and they were now pecking companionably at some unseen treasure in the grass. The thought of them being taken, of their small, peaceful world being shattered, sent a fresh wave of anxiety through him. This wasn't just about chickens anymore. This was about a bully. Yes, but it felt deeper, more insidious. It was about his right to live peacefully in his own home, a right he'd fought for his country to protect, now threatened in his own backyard. He immediately called Pete Morales, the local sheriff. Pete, also black, had been a couple of years ahead of him in high school, a football star who'd stayed in Richmond and made a career in law enforcement. Their paths had diverged wildly, but a thread of shared experience and understanding remained. Pete listened patiently, the occasional sigh a testament to his familiarity with HOA disputes, though this one, Noah could tell, registered with a particular gravity in Pete's voice. "Look, Noah," Pete said, his tone serious. "HOA law is a tricky beast. They have a lot of power within their own communities, as long as they're following their own established rules and state statutes. But what she's threatening, entering your property without your consent to remove them, that's a shakier legal ground. They typically need a court order for something like that, unless there's an immediate, demonstrable hazard." He paused. "And knowing how things can be, Noah, you make sure you're beyond reproach. Everything by the book. And a few quiet chickens are not an immediate hazard," Noah stated, more than asked, appreciating Pete's unstated implications. "Not in my book. Not by a long shot. But Karen Blackwell plays hardball. She's got a direct line to a couple of city council members, and she's not afraid to make noise. Be careful. Brother, document everything. Keep a copy of that therapist's letter handy, and maybe think about reinforcing that Coop lock, just in case. Don't give her any opening. Reinforce the lock." The suggestion, while practical, sent a chill down Noah's spine. It felt like fortifying a position against an impending enemy assault, a feeling he knew all too well. He had hoped to leave that part of his life behind. But it seemed Karen Blackwell was determined to bring the battle to his backyard. And Noah suspected this battle wasn't just about poultry. That evening, the first anonymous, handwritten note appeared, tucked under his front doormat. It was cruder than Karen's official HOA correspondence. The block letters practically screaming off the cheap notebook paper, "Get rid of the filthy birds or else your neighbors are watching." Noah's blood ran cold. This was an escalation. The watching felt particularly ominous. In this quiet, predominantly white neighborhood, the words took on a sinister weight. He saved the note, his Marine training kicking in. Document everything. He installed a small, motion-activated security camera he'd bought after a minor vandalism incident a year prior in his old neighborhood, positioning it to cover his front porch and a portion of his yard that included the chicken coop. His old neighborhood, where he'd also felt eyes on him, just for existing. The next day passed in a tense quiet. Noah spent the morning reinforcing the coop's door and run with heavier gauge wire mesh and a sturdier latch. He felt a grim satisfaction with the work, but also a deep sense of unease. He was fortifying his home against his neighbors in America. In 2016, it felt surreal and sickeningly familiar. His chickens, oblivious to the suburban warfare brewing around them, went about their business. Their innocent clucking, usually a sound of comfort, now seemed fragile, vulnerable. Every passing car on the street made him jump. Every unfamiliar noise was a potential threat. The PTSD was a coiled snake in his gut, and Karen Blackwell, with her petty tyranny, was poking it with a stick. He called Dr. Ramirez, his voice tight. "It's getting worse," he admitted. "The stress from this HOA thing, it's stirring things up, making me feel targeted." Dr. Ramirez was sympathetic but firm. "You know your rights, Noah. And those chickens are a legitimate part of your prescribed therapy. Don't let her bully you, but also don't let this consume you. Focus on your coping mechanisms and keep me informed." The 48-hour deadline was set to expire the next morning. Noah barely slept, his ears straining for any sound outside. He imagined Karen Blackwell leading a mob of angry neighbors with pitchforks and torches, a ridiculous image. Yet it didn't feel entirely impossible given her venom in the anonymous note. He reread the Fair Housing Act provisions regarding assistance animals, his therapist's letter, and the Virginia state laws. He knew he was in the right, but the thought of the confrontation to come filled him with a dread that tasted like old fear, the kind that came when the enemy was unseen and the rules of engagement were unclear. This wasn't Fallujah, but it was a battle for his peace, his sanctuary, and in a way, his sanity. And Noah Jackson was not a man who backed down from a fight when he knew he was right, especially when so much was at stake. The sun rose on Richmond the next morning with a deceptive warmth, the light filtering through the tall oaks of Berkeley Heights, painting dappled patterns on Noah's lawn. But there was no warmth in Noah. He'd been up since before dawn, a cold knot of dread tightening in his stomach with every passing minute. He'd made coffee he couldn't taste, staring out at the reinforced chicken coop, a small, defiant fortress in his backyard. Henrietta and the girls were clucking softly, oblivious. The 48-hour deadline had arrived. He rechecked the small security camera he'd aimed at his front yard and coop. Its little green light was blinking, recording, a small comfort. He had his phone, ready to record video if needed, and a folder containing copies of Dr. Ramirez's letter, the Fair Housing Act information, and Virginia codes on assistance animals. He was prepared for an argument, for more threats, perhaps even for a citation. He was not prepared for what happened next. Around 9:00 a.m., a white SUV, the kind favored by upscale suburbanites, pulled up and parked directly opposite his driveway. Karen Blackwell emerged from the passenger side, her face a mask of grim satisfaction. She wasn't alone. A burly man in a generic work jumpsuit got out of the driver's side, and another, similarly dressed, exited the rear. They carried crowbars and a sledgehammer. Noah's heart hammered against his ribs. This wasn't a discussion. This was an invasion. He stepped out onto his porch, the folder clutched in his hand. "Mrs. Blackwell," he called out, his voice louder and firmer than he felt. "This is my private property. You are not authorized to enter, nor are these men you've brought with you." Karen Blackwell marched halfway up his driveway, stopping just short of his porch steps, her companions flanking her slightly behind, like poorly disguised enforcers. "Mr. Jackson," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet morning air, loud enough for any curious neighbors to hear. "The deadline has passed. You were warned. The HOA is now exercising its right to rectify the bylaw violation. There is no violation that supersedes federal and state law regarding assistance animals." "Mrs. Blackwell," Noah said, holding up the folder, "I have all the documentation here. My therapist has contacted you. Forcing entry and destroying my property is illegal." He saw a curtain twitch in the house next door. Someone was watching. He wondered if they'd noted the color of his skin, the crowbars in the white men's hands, and drawn any conclusions. The silence from his neighbors was deafening. "We are not destroying your property, Mr. Jackson," Blackwell stated, with a chilling air of righteousness. "We are removing an illegal structure and relocating the nuisance animals as per HOA covenants, which you agreed to when you purchased your home." She gave a curt nod to the two men. "Proceed. You take one more step onto my lawn, and I'm calling the sheriff," Noah warned, his hand going to his phone in his pocket. The tremor was back, stronger now, his breathing shallowing. The men hesitated for a split second, looking at Blackwell. "He's bluffing," Blackwell spat. "He knows he's in the wrong. Do it." The two men advanced, walking onto his grass, heading straight for the side gate that led to the backyard and the chicken coop. "This is unlawful, and I am ordering you off my property," Noah shouted, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and a rising tide of panic that tasted metallic, like old blood. He fumbled for his phone, his fingers clumsy, trying to dial Pete Morales' direct line. One of the men, the one with the sledgehammer, simply kicked open the unlocked side gate. Noah hadn't anticipated they'd be so brazen as to ignore his direct verbal command to leave. The other followed with the crowbar. Karen Blackwell remained on the driveway, a smug, triumphant smile playing on her lips, watching. Noah got Pete on the line. "Pete, it's Noah. They're here, Blackwell and two guys. They're in my yard. They're going for the chickens. They have tools. Pete, a sledgehammer." "Stay on the line. Noah, I'm dispatching a car right now. Are you safe? Don't engage them physically." Pete's voice was urgent, but it was happening too fast. He could hear the splintering crash of wood from the backyard even as he spoke, followed by the terrified squawking of his hens. A wave of fury, so potent it almost buckled his knees, washed over Noah. These weren't just boards and wire. This was his peace, his therapy, his sanctuary they were smashing. He felt the familiar, suffocating cloak of combat stress begin to envelop him. The narrowed vision, the ringing in his ears, the desperate urge to fight, to protect. He raced through his house to the back door, skidding to a halt as he burst onto his small patio. The scene was one of brutal, senseless destruction. One man was systematically tearing apart the wire mesh of the run with the crowbar, while the other swung the sledgehammer against the sturdy wooden posts of the coop Noah had so carefully reinforced. Splintered wood flew. Beatrice, feathers puffed in terror, was trying to flutter out of reach. Cornered, Henrietta and Agatha were cowering in what remained of a nesting box, their panicked cries piercing the air. Mildred was running frantically back and forth along the far fence line. "Get away from them! Get away from my birds!" Noah roared, his voice raw. He took a step forward, then another, his fists clenched, every instinct screaming at him to intervene, to stop the violence. The man with the sledgehammer paused, turning to look at Noah. He was younger than Noah had first thought, with dull eyes that showed no emotion. "Just doing our job, buddy. HOA orders." He then turned back and delivered another crushing blow to the main support of the coop. The structure groaned, sagged, and then partially collapsed, sending up a cloud of dust and chicken feed. Karen Blackwell had walked around to the backyard now, standing by the broken gate, observing the demolition with cold approval. "They won't be harmed, Mr. Jackson," she called out, though her tone suggested she cared little either way. "They'll be rehomed. Rehomed, you're terrorizing them. You're destroying my property. This is criminal." Noah felt something snap inside him. The careful control he'd fought so hard to maintain for so long, the discipline honed in the crucible of war, was fraying. He wanted to charge, to tackle these men, to make them pay for this violation. But Pete's words echoed, "Don't engage them physically." He knew that as a black man, any physical response from him, however justified, would be twisted, used against him, potentially with severe consequences. This awareness was a bitter pill, another layer of injustice. He saw Henrietta make a desperate, flapping escape from the wreckage, only to be roughly grabbed by the man with the crowbar, who began stuffing her unceremoniously into a burlap sack. Agatha and Beatrice were quickly captured next, their terrified squawks muffled as they too disappeared into sacks. Mildred, in her panic, had managed to squeeze through a small gap in the fence into his neighbor's yard. For a moment, Noah hoped she was safe, but then he saw the neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman who'd always seemed pleasant enough, shooing Mildred back towards the chaos in Noah's yard, her face a mixture of fear and disapproval. Mildred, confused and terrified, was then easily snatched up. Within minutes, it was over. The coop was a pile of splintered wood and twisted wire. The chickens, his anchors, were gone, carried off in sacks by the two men who then silently walked back to their vehicle, Karen Blackwell following them like a conquering general. She paused at the edge of his driveway, turned, and gave Noah one last, victorious smirk before getting into the SUV. The vehicle pulled away, leaving behind a stunned silence broken only by Noah's ragged breathing and the distant sound of a siren. Noah stood amidst the ruins, shaking, not from cold, but from a volatile cocktail of rage, helplessness, and a profound sense of violation. His sanctuary had been defiled, his peace shattered. The camera on his front porch had caught their arrival, their illegal entry, but not the brutal destruction in the back. His phone call to Pete would be logged. He looked at the wreckage, tears stinging his eyes, tears of anger, not sadness. This was not just about chickens. This was about power, about prejudice, about the casual cruelty of people like Karen Blackwell who could inflict such damage and feel utterly justified. The siren grew louder, and a patrol car, lights flashing, finally pulled up to his curb. A young officer, not Pete, stepped out. Noah knew this was just the beginning of another fight, but as he looked at the devastation, a cold, hard resolve began to form beneath the turmoil. They had picked a fight with the wrong Marine. The young officer, whose name tag read Miller, surveyed the scene with an air of cautious neutrality. He took Noah's statement, his pen scratching methodically on his notepad. "So, they came onto your property and dismantled the chicken coop and took the chickens," he asked, his tone suggesting this was more of a bizarre property dispute than a criminal act. "They trespassed, officer," Noah stated, his voice tight, but controlled. He was fighting to keep the tremor from his voice, the rage from his eyes. "They ignored my verbal warnings to leave. They destroyed my property, valued at several $100s for the materials alone, not to mention my labor. And they stole my animals, my emotional support animals, for which the HOA had full documentation." He handed Miller the folder. "It's all in there. Their names, their actions." It was led by Karen Blackwell of the HOA. Miller glanced through the papers with a cursory air. "HOA disputes can get pretty heated, sir." "Technically, if their bylaws state no livestock..." "Technically, officer," Noah interrupted, his patience wearing thin. "The Fair Housing Act and Virginia state law protect the rights of individuals with disabilities to have assistance animals. And what they did here today, the way they did it, was not a dispute. It was a home invasion and theft. I want to press charges." He saw the flicker of doubt, perhaps even dismissal, in Miller's eyes. It was a look he'd seen before. Just then, and Sheriff Pete Morales' cruiser pulled up, tires crunching on the gravel shoulder. Pete got out, his expression grim as he took in the scene, the ruined coop, the distress etched on Noah's face, and Officer Miller's by-the-book stance. "Miller, what have we got?" Pete asked, his voice carrying the weight of authority. Miller straightened. "Sheriff, Mr. Jackson here is reporting a property destruction and animal theft issue with his HOA. Says they came in, tore down his chicken coop." Pete walked over to the wreckage, kicking at a splintered 2x4. He looked at Noah. "They actually came in and did this after our conversation." Noah nodded, a bitter taste in his mouth. Blackwell and two hired hands, sledgehammer and crowbars. They took all four girls. Pete's jaw tightened. He turned to Miller. Get detailed statements from any neighbors who might have seen this. Canvass the street and treat this as a criminal investigation. Unlawful entry, destruction of property, larceny of animals. Get a forensics unit to check for prints around the gate and what's left of this coop, just in case those hired hands have a record. This isn't some bylaw squabble when they come onto a man's property with tools of destruction without a court order. Miller, now looking more serious, nodded. Yes, Sheriff. He headed towards the neighboring houses. Pete turned back to Noah. You okay, man? He asked, his voice softer. No, Pete, I'm not okay, Noah said, the admission costing him. They waltzed in here like they owned the place, smashed everything, traumatized my birds, and then stuffed them in sacks like garbage. The image sent a fresh spear of anguish through him. His carefully constructed calm was crumbling. The familiar tendrils of PTSD were wrapping around his chest, squeezing the air from his lungs. The ringing in his ears, a ghost of old explosions, was louder now. The camera you set up, Pete said, his eyes sharp. Did it catch them? The front one caught their arrival, Blackwell and the two men, their tools, them walking onto my property after I warned them not to. It would have caught them kicking in the side gate, but not the destruction in the back. That happened too fast. It's something, Noah. It's evidence of trespass, at least, and your testimony about the rest. We'll get Blackwell's side of it, but what she did, the way she did it, this is way over the line. Even for a power-tripping HOA. Pete ran a hand over his closely cropped hair. The rehoming. Any idea where they took them? She just said rehomed, smirked when she said it. Noah felt a cold dread. Knowing Karen Blackwell's vindictiveness, rehomed could mean anything. I'll have a word with animal control, see if any chickens matching that description turn up, Pete said, though his tone wasn't optimistic. And I'm going to pay Mrs. Blackwell a visit myself. This stinks, Noah. It stinks to high heaven. After Pete and Miller left, Noah walked through the debris field that had once been a place of peace. He picked up a single, perfect brown feather, Henrietta's. The loss was a physical ache. It wasn't just about the chickens, it was the violation, the brazen disregard for his home, his rights, his well-being. It was the feeling of being targeted, of his sanctuary being deliberately and violently dismantled. He felt the old hypervigilance creeping back in, the paranoia that every shadow held a threat. He hadn't felt this exposed, this raw, since he'd left the service. He went inside and pulled up the footage from his security camera. There it was, Karen Blackwell, smug and imperious, directing her two hired thugs. The clear image of them walking past his no trespassing sign, which he'd put up years ago, more as a general deterrent than in anticipation of such a blatant violation. The distinct moment one of them kicked open his side gate. It wasn't the whole story, but it was damning. His Marine training, the part of him that knew how to strategize, to fight back when cornered, began to stir through the fog of his trauma. He couldn't let this stand. This wasn't just an attack on him, it was an attack on decency, on the rule of law. If Blackwell could do this to him, she could do it to anyone. A new thought began to form, a seed of an idea that felt both terrifying and empowering. He had evidence. He had a story of injustice. And he lived in an age where information, when wielded correctly, could be a powerful weapon. Later that afternoon, Pete called. Okay, so I talked down to Blackwell. She's doubling down. Claims the HOA had every right. Cited some emergency clause about hazardous materials, bird droppings. Apparently, utter nonsense without proof. But that's her story. She claims the chickens were taken to a rural farm sanctuary. Refused to give me a name or location. Said it was confidential to protect the sanctuary from unwanted attention. Smelled like BS to me. Noah. So, what happens now? Noah asked, his voice flat. Legally, it's a process. We're writing up the report. Destruction of property, larceny, trespass. It'll go to the Commonwealth's attorney to see if they'll press charges. That can take time. And HOA cases, they can get messy, bogged down in civil courts too. Pete sounded frustrated. I also ran the names of the guys she hired, a local fix-it company, couple of minor priors on one of them. Nothing that would make them prohibited from working. But it shows the caliber of people she's using. A rural farm sanctuary. Noah didn't believe it for a second. Knowing Karen's malice, he feared a much grimmer fate for his girls. The thought fueled his resolve. He couldn't rely solely on a slow-moving legal process that might ultimately get bogged down or dismissed. Karen Blackwell was counting on that. Counting on him being just another disgruntled resident she could bully into silence. That evening, something shifted. Noah was staring at the footage again, the anger coiling tighter in his gut, when he noticed something he'd missed. On the edge of the frame, just as Blackwell's SUV was pulling away, a different neighbor, old Mr. Abernathy from across the street, was visible on his porch, holding up his smartphone as if recording. Mr. Abernathy, a quiet widower who rarely interacted with anyone. Had he recorded the entire thing? The destruction in the back, a new energy surged through Noah. He had to find out. He walked across the street, the first time he'd initiated contact with any neighbor beyond a polite nod. Mr. Abernathy was hesitant at first, a little fearful, it seemed. I don't want any trouble with that HOA, son, he said, his voice thin. Karen Blackwell, she holds grudges. Mr. Abernathy, Noah said, keeping his voice calm and respectful. I saw you on your porch. I think you might have recorded what happened in my backyard. Those chickens, they meant a lot to me. What Mrs. Blackwell did was wrong, and I'm just trying to get some justice, some accountability. The old man looked at Noah, then at the wreckage visible across the street. After a long moment, he nodded slowly. She's a tyrant, that one. Always has been. I did record it, the whole thing. Couldn't believe my eyes. My wife, God rest her soul, she loved birds. He disappeared into his house and returned with a small digital camera, not a smartphone. Got it all right here. The noise, the smashing, the way they grabbed those poor creatures. This was it. This was the twist Noah needed, hidden in plain sight. A silent witness. Sir, Noah said, his voice thick with emotion, would you be willing to share that footage with me and with the sheriff? Abernathy hesitated for a moment longer, then gave a decisive nod. It's the right thing to do. What she did, it wasn't neighborly. It wasn't right. As Noah walked back to his house, the digital camera clutched in his hand like a lifeline. The plan that had been forming in his mind began to solidify. Karen Blackwell thought she had silenced him, thought she had won. She had no idea who she was dealing with. She had brought the war to his doorstep, and now Noah Jackson, former Marine, was going to choose his own battlefield, and it wouldn't be confined to the quiet streets of Berkeley Heights. He would show them all the meaning of resistance. He would find his girls. Back in his own kitchen, Noah plugged Mr. Abernathy's camera into his laptop. His hands were steady now, his purpose clear. The footage was even more damning than he could have hoped. The wide shot from across the street captured everything: the casual brutality of the men, the clear terror of his hens, the splintering destruction of the coop he'd built with his own hands, and Karen Blackwell overseeing it all with an expression of cold satisfaction. There was no denying the malice, no hiding the illegality. Noah didn't just have a story, he had irrefutable proof, and he knew exactly what to do with it. The slow grind of the legal system was one avenue, but Karen Blackwell had underestimated him. She'd assumed he was isolated, that his voice wouldn't carry. She was wrong. He took a deep breath, the kind he used to take before breaching a door in a hostile building. He opened his rarely used Facebook account, the one with a handful of old Marine buddies and distant relatives. He set up his phone on a small tripod, aimed it at his laptop screen, ready to play Mr. Abernathy's footage. Then he hit the Go Live button. "My name is Noah Jackson," he began, his voice low and resonant, carrying the quiet authority of a man who had seen too much but refused to be broken. "I'm a veteran of the United States Marine Corps. I live in Richmond, Virginia, and this morning, my home was invaded, my property destroyed, and my emotional support animals were stolen by my Homeowners Association, led by a woman named Karen Blackwell." He recounted the events calmly, factually, letting the injustice speak for itself. He showed his therapist's letter, the HOA's threatening notices, and then he played Mr. Abernathy's video. He didn't need to embellish. The footage was a raw testament to the cruelty he and his chickens had endured. As the video played, showing the brutal dismantling of the coop and the terrified hens being bagged, Noah superimposed the footage from his own front door camera, showing Blackwell and her men trespassing. "These aren't just chickens to me," Noah explained, his voice cracking slightly with emotion for the first time. "They're my therapy. They help me deal with severe PTSD from my service to this country, service that was supposed to protect the very rights Karen Blackwell and the Berkeley Heights HOA trampled on today." He then held up his Purple Heart medal, the deep purple ribbon stark against his dark skin. "This medal means I bled for this country. I fought for the right to live peacefully. And I will not stand by while a petty tyrant terrorizes me in my own backyard because she doesn't like my therapy chickens." He ended the live stream, which had lasted nearly 30 minutes, with a direct appeal. "Share this, please. Let people know what's happening. Don't let them get away with this." The initial viewers were few, mostly his old service buddies, but they started sharing, and then their friends shared. The video, with its potent combination of a wronged veteran, animal cruelty, and HOA overreach, struck a nerve. The view count began to climb. Hundreds, then thousands, then tens of thousands within hours. Comments flooded in, overwhelmingly supportive of Noah, expressing outrage at Karen Blackwell and the HOA. Hashtags like #Justice for Noah, #Henrietta Matters, and #Stop HOA Irony began trending in the Richmond area. Then wider, by late afternoon, local news outlets, alerted by the online uproar, were calling Noah. A reporter from the Richmond Times-Dispatch wanted an interview. A crew from a local TV station was on its way to his house. Pete Morales called again, his voice a mixture of awe and caution. "Noah, you've kicked a hornet's nest, my friend. My phone's been ringing off the hook. City council members, the mayor's office, they've all seen that video or heard about it. Blackwell is apparently in meltdown." "Good," Noah said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. "Where are my chickens?" "Pete, that's the next thing. With this kind of pressure, her confidential rural sanctuary story is going to fall apart fast. We're leaning on her hard. The Commonwealth's attorney is definitely interested now." The pressure worked. Late that evening, under the glare of media attention and an official investigation that was rapidly escalating, Karen Blackwell, through her lawyer, finally disclosed the location of the chickens. They had been dumped, not at a sanctuary, but at a rural animal auction site known for selling poultry for slaughter. The Fix-It Company employees, facing potential charges themselves, had corroborated the story. Pete, with Noah beside him, drove out to the auction site immediately, in a dark, crowded holding pen, amidst hundreds of other frightened birds. They found them, Henrietta, Agatha, Beatrice, and Mildred. They were stressed, dirty, and missing a few feathers, but they were alive. The relief that washed over Noah was immense, almost debilitating. He gently gathered his girls, their familiar weight and soft clucking a balm to his frayed nerves. The fallout for Karen Blackwell and the Berkeley Heights HOA was swift and severe. The live stream was a public relations disaster. Faced with overwhelming evidence and public condemnation, the HOA board convened an emergency meeting, Karen Blackwell was summarily removed from her position. The HOA issued a public apology to Noah Jackson, which was widely reported. They also agreed to pay for the complete reconstruction of his chicken coop to his specifications, cover all veterinary bills for the chickens, and provide a substantial settlement for the emotional distress and violation of his rights. The two men who had destroyed the coop and taken the chickens were charged with trespassing and cruelty to animals. They're just following orders, defense crumbling under scrutiny. Karen Blackwell herself faced potential charges of conspiracy, destruction of property, and larceny, with the Commonwealth's attorney actively pursuing the case. Within a week, a new much larger and more secure chicken coop, funded by the HOA settlement, stood in Noah's backyard. Volunteers from a local veteran support group, moved by his story, had come to help him build it. Henrietta, Agatha, Beatrice, and Mildred, after a thorough checkup and some much-needed TLC, were back to their old routines, dust bathing in the Virginia sun, their gentle clucking once again a sound of peace. Noah Jackson became an unlikely local hero. His quiet determination and his refusal to be intimidated had resonated with many. He had shown that one man armed with the truth and the courage to speak it could stand up to injustice and win. His fight had also sparked a larger conversation in Richmond about the power of HOAs and the rights of homeowners, particularly those relying on assistance animals. Standing by his new coop, watching his chickens, Noah felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in a long time. The battle had been hard fought, the victory bittersweet given the trauma, but it was a victory nonetheless. The ghost of Fallujah still whispered sometimes, but now there was another voice too. The voice of a community that had stood with him, the voice of justice served. He had not only reclaimed his sanctuary, but he had also found his voice, and in doing so had helped ensure that others might not have to fight the same battle alone. The war for Berkeley Heights was over, and Noah Jackson, the quiet Marine who just wanted to be left alone with his chickens, was finally home. Noah's courageous battle for his therapy chickens ultimately exposed injustice and rallied a community. He proved that truth and bravery can triumph over bullying and abuse of power. Thank you for watching his inspiring journey. Please subscribe, like, and comment below to support more stories like this and share your thoughts.